Welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Hoosiers Roundtable podcast. I am Brandon Brown, flanked as always by Todd Golden and Jack Ankony, the foremost experts on Indiana basketball. We're going to find out, man. I mean, just before we started recording just now, guys, I said, man, it's kind of starting to feel like a broken record a little bit. I'm going to ask some of the same questions. Some of the same results have happened again. Some more of those inconsistencies that Todd has really done a good job of kind of outlining over the last couple of episodes. So we'll start with you, Todd. Unfortunately, coming back to talk again after another loss, Indiana had a lead late, lost it, and ended up losing by 1 point to Maryland. Kind of on a game-winning three. Indiana had a little bit of a shot at the end, kind of a desperation, but gave up a 3-pointer when you can't do that. And there they are with another loss. So how does it happen? Where's the blame? Like why is this again kind of our direction of conversation?
Well, I mean, Indiana did show some gumption in coming back. The thing is, they were down 29 minutes of that game, and so the end kind of overwhelms the fact that they didn't play very well for most of that game. Then they come back, to their credit, they were able to wipe out Maryland's lead, had I think it peaked at a 5-point lead late, but then let it slip away through a lot of mistakes in the final 38 seconds of the game. There was a missed front end of a 1-and-1, which kind of started it. And then they had a foul to give on Maryland's possession where they hit the three and they didn't give it. And then the final possession was a mess because of the substitutions at the last minute. Didn't run the play they were supposed to run and paid the price for it. Miles Rice took a very wild 3-pointer at the end. So, it looked the end of it made it look probably much worse than it would have been otherwise. But the truth is that Indiana only had control of that game for maybe 5 minutes, and that was the 5 minutes they came back. So, they really need a more consistent effort, obviously, for all 40. So, the end makes it look even worse. But that was, that game, they were pretty fortunate to get back in the first place, and that's what makes it so bad that the lead was given away in the final seconds.
Jack, I have to ask because I got a chance to go through the Mike Woodson post-game press conference, and I mean, Todd just outlined 3 or 4 things right there. Like they didn't do this, they didn't do that, they didn't do that, and it sounds like they planned to or intended to. Mike Woodson, I thought, did a good job of not acting very frustrated, but it sounds like he had a plan in place and it didn't get executed. I mean, how much is it? I don't know if I've ever seen so many things at the end of a game in the last handful of seconds where the coach says we should have done this and we didn't do any of them. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the blame can go towards the players for not executing what Woodson was talking about. He wanted them to give a foul on the possession that they gave up the 3, which they had a foul to give, so it would have just reset Maryland's possession, and they didn't do that. Todd mentioned missing the front end of the 1-and-1, but then I think some of the Indiana's last offensive possession, I think it was sort of on Woodson for creating some of the confusion that there was with some of the subbing, which I didn't think the subbing. I thought the subs he made to bring in Goody and Mbako at the end, those are 2 of Indiana's better offensive players. So it makes sense from that perspective. But when you're doing that on the fly in the last couple seconds of the game without a timeout, and clearly there was some confusion with Miles Rice in terms of what the play was. Woodson was on his radio show the other day saying, well, there wasn't confusion, but they didn't execute it. But, I mean, it's pretty clear you could see there was kind of guys didn't know what they were doing, so I think you can kind of spread it around to the whole team and to Woodson for not getting them on the same page. It's not one play that cost them, like Todd mentioned. For most of the game, they were down. But Maryland really outclassed them kind of in the last minute or so, just with situational, play and execution.
Mike Woodson incredibly calm after the game? Does he ever blow up? You think? Does he just go home and just terrorize his own house? I'm surprised at how well he keeps it together after a loss like that.
Well, it almost seems like he's sort of, he's been coaching for a long time. He knows how to handle the media, and he knows it almost sort of seems like he knows what he's going to be asked, and he can anticipate how he's going to answer it to sort of come off in a way that things aren't as bad as maybe they seem to fans or to us, which in some way I think kind of gives off an air of like they're not panicking, they're level-headed, they're not going to get too down after one loss. But I think also it can sort of come off to some fans, at least what I see in comments, of it makes him look like maybe he doesn't he's not coming across knowing what the problems are or how to fix them, I think is what I see from some fans, just kind of the way that he speaks after the games. But no, I mean, he's been upset, and there's been some instances, after losses when he's a little bit more fired up. But he does do a pretty good job of not coming off too frustrated, I guess.
I think your point is a good one. He's been doing it a long time. He's and it's a personality thing. He kind of seems like he's that way, just natural. I'm just trying to think of other guys in the Big Ten who like Izzo or Matt Payne. I mean, just other dudes so wouldn't be that level headed. And like you said, to his credit, it's probably good in some ways, but maybe that's why there are some inconsistencies. Like the urgency might not be there. I don't know, Todd. Where do you think this ranks as? One of Indiana's bad losses on the season. They've had some bad ones earlier that we talked about, 25-point losses. I don't know which one feels better or worse when you get blown out in your own gym or you lose a heartbreaker at the last second. They're both bad. But where does this one rank for you in terms of like how bad this is for Indiana's postseason hopes?
Well, yeah, I mean, you just said it right there. I mean, what makes this one bad, other than the nature of it, is they had, this was a game they needed to win.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it won and then they didn't. So I think close losses feel worse. I think they're worse I don't know if they're worse to the fans. I mean, the Illinois loss a couple weeks ago was bad in a different way. It was just a dumpster fire right from the start. And so it's what it really does is it just fuels the angst that kind of surrounds this program right now. I mean, it gives fuel to the fire of the people who are very upset with Woodson, and I don't blame them. I mean, they should be upset after, especially the way that last possession was handled. As Jack said, I watched the replay of it later, and they're running in subs on the advice of one of the assistant coaches. At the last minute, when what the sequence of that was, there was a timeout, and then Maryland knocked the ball out of bounds, and you need offense at that point. And my question would be why, and my question that I had literally in the press conference afterwards was, why was that the right time for the sub? I mean, why didn't you have those guys out there off the timeout? And then maybe it's a little bit less chaotic. But I think it's tough. I think right now Woodson, in the eyes of a lot of fans, I don't really think it mattered what he does or doesn't do, whether he's emotional on this. He's more emotional than I think people give him credit for. He reacts on the sideline to things. I think that's kind of a bad rap. But in the eyes of many fans, they've already lost him. And I don't know that there's anything he can do to get them back at this point, short of winning every game. And he still has supporters out there too, but it's a game like this just looks bad. It just does. And whether you are a Woodson supporter or somebody who wants Woodson to be gone, it's hard to defend the way that game ended, and it just makes things worse for him, puts more pressure on the players, and and in the context of the games that they're in the midst of, it was a win they had to have and they didn't get it. So it's as simple as that, and it's something that the team is going to have to try to make up for with a bunch of difficult games to come.
Well, Todd, you touched on this earlier, and I think this was your question, so we'll stick with you for a second. The Hoosiers were down 29 minutes of the game. They allowed Maryland to shoot almost 50% from the field, 49%, and they haven't played a real stifling defensive. They haven't had a stifling defensive effort in the last 8 games. As you put these stats together, letting all of those teams over the last 8 games shoot over 40% from the floor, and you've touched on this consistency issue for several weeks in a row now. So can they ever get a consistent outcome or effort if they keep allowing teams to score as easily as they have over these last 8 games?
Well, it puts more pressure on your offense, obviously. I mean, you have to score a certain amount to make up for what you're giving up. And since Big Ten play resumed, IU is not every opponent has shot at least 40%. So if you mix in the threes that come out of that, you're going to have to score at least close to, at least 70 points a game, which they can do that. It's not that they can't, but it puts undue pressure on your offense. And this offense doesn't always run at, 100% optimum in the first place. So, within games, it's a cliche, every possession counts anyway, regardless of how good you're playing defense, but it makes it even more so when you're giving up a certain amount on the other end. And, there's players who could be exploited defensively. I mean, let's be honest, Mackenzie Mbako, he's been better offensively lately. And I think Malik Renew's return has helped that. But teams attack him defensively, as I would if I were scouting IU. So there's weaknesses out there that are hard to cover up. And so it just puts more pressure on the team in every facet when you can't hold teams down.
Jack, I think you did a good job of breaking down, Mike Woodson's answers and how he approaches things. And he's a vet, and he's done it a million times. And he even probably knows what's going to be asked before he gets up there. And that's probably the case with a lot of coaches. But there's been a lot of finger pointing, and we talked about 3, 4, 5 different reasons why the game fell apart a little bit at the end, which leads back to the inconsistency problem. And these guys just don't seem to be on the same page for whatever reason. Do you think Mike Woodson still has control of the locker room? Are the guys listening to his message? I mean, we don't know exactly what's being said behind closed doors, but is it landing at this point?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you look at it from I think where you see where it's maybe not connecting is on the defensive end, because we've seen over the last couple of years, if you look at Woodson's tenure overall, the defense has sort of been steadily declining, and they've given up I think they gave up 12 threes against Maryland and 13 against Northwestern. And so to me, it seems like whatever Woodson is wanting Indiana to do defensively, which is usually more of an emphasis of limit drives and sort of pack in the paint, and they're going to give up some threes. But it seems like that's kind of where the disconnect is, I think, in my opinion, because we talked to, when Woodson speaks after the game, it's often like, yeah, we weren't closing out, or we weren't up to touch on shooters. We weren't closing out enough. And so I think you see that on the defensive end, where what he's instructing them, there doesn't seem to be a great amount of cohesion. And I guess you could credit that to, it could be maybe he's not teaching it in a way that they're able to learn it well enough, or it could just be these guys haven't played a ton together. A team has 7 new guys, so you don't sort of have that instinctual knowledge of, this is where my teammate's going to be, this is how we need to rotate on this sort of play. So I think you could say that there's some sort of disconnect there. And then I also think just, Woodson talked on Monday about how he sort of noticed that the team's morale is kind of low after the Maryland loss. So you wonder, how is he able to motivate guys and keep them confident and not too discouraged after losses like this, which I think is a big question going forward, because you got a bunch of tough games ahead.
I'll add one more thing to that. The one thing we don't know is what the accountability factor is for not defending. I mean, from the outside looking in, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of accountability, but that's easy for us to say. I mean, it might be internally that we don't know about, but it isn't demonstrated very often in playing time or anything like that. So it's something that can easily be said. Obviously, I just said it, but we honestly don't know. But there's no outward proof that you're a bad defender, you're not going to play. Other than, I will say, Mbako was pulled out of the game, despite the fact he was having a pretty good game in the final 9 minutes, and was only put back in the game in that sequence at the end. So maybe the actual patterns of the playing time are one indication, I guess. But it's not like you see, oh well, so and so got attacked defensively, he's going to play less. It doesn't happen that often. So that's the only thing we can really have as outsiders to judge those things. But I bring it up, but the truth is we really don't know. There could be some behind the scenes things that do occur when you don't execute. But from the outside looking in, it's easy for people to make the inference that there's very little that that there's very little penalty for not executing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I mean, I think you're right with some of that, Todd. I mean, I also think Woodson is sort of in a position where, he's tried several different starting lineups and, given guys less minutes based on stuff. So I get what you're saying. I think that's true to a certain extent. They've also had a bunch of injuries. So I think in some games it's been kind of nothing's really working, try this and try that. But you're right. We don't know what the penalties are or how he holds guys accountable, like in practice or when they're watching film and stuff like that. But
Well, let's close the book on the unfortunate ending against Maryland, where they lose by just 1 point after a few breakdowns at the end, and now they have to get ready to go to Purdue on Friday. Number 10 Boilermakers. That place is always incredibly tough to play. We'll get to some of that here in a couple minutes with a series that Todd's putting together. We'll talk about Mackey Arena and how that's a really tough place for anybody to play. But let's just keep it 100 right out of the gate. Do you give them a shot? Jack, do they have a shot to win on Friday on the road against Purdue?
I don't see a great chance for Indiana in this game. I think to win at Mackey, you need to be, it's going to be extremely loud there. Guys talk all the time about how you can't hear when you're calling plays, and if there's already issues in terms of assignments and confusion with plays, that's only going to be amplified at Mackey. And then sort of what I mentioned with the confidence and stuff, that can easily be shaken, I think, on the road too. So if you sort of just look at beyond the X's and O's and the one-on-one matchups, I think those are two things that just sort of right off the bat, when I look at this matchup, like, man, it's going to be tough to do that if you're sort of shaken in that respect, I think.
Todd, do they have a shot? Can they go in there and get a W?
It's going to be difficult. I mean, Purdue is just more connected than Indiana is right now. I mean, even with the changes that they've had since last year, obviously Zach Edey is gone, but they still have a team of veterans who have played together for a long time. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman, Wren, Caleb First. Those guys have been playing together for a long time, and they're well drilled in what they do. And no matter where you play Purdue, it's tough to beat them, because you have to beat them in terms of you have to hope that they're not executing on their night, and that doesn't happen very often. It happened Ohio State. It did happen with them a week ago, but it doesn't happen very often. You look at Purdue played Michigan at home recently. They just blew the doors off of Michigan. That's a well-coached Michigan team. So IU has to do a bunch of things that they haven't proven they can do to win this game. Stopping Purdue's guards is one thing I would have a concern about. So it's a rivalry game. You always put the idea in your head that that the road team can win because of the emotion of it. But when you look at the talent on both sides, well, maybe not talent, but the way the teams, how connected the teams are on both sides. Obviously Purdue has a big edge. Playing inside Mackey, as Jack said, is difficult. Paint Crew gets into it. They're definitely into it for IU every year. It's their Super Bowl. So I think it's going to be tough. I think on the right night it can be done, but Indiana it's been a while since they've had the right night. In fact, I don't know that they've had, no team is perfect, but they haven't had a game where they just came out and flat out executed for, say, 30 out of the 40 minutes, even in some of their wins. So I think the odds are definitely against the Hoosiers.
You mentioned Braden Smith. He might have more grays in his beard than me. Those guys have been playing together forever, and that's tough. And that's on the like I said, on the road, and all of that stacks up to be a potential another loss for Indiana. But is there, if Indiana has a matchup or something that they can exploit, or do they have an advantage over Purdue somewhere? What is that, Jack? What's something that they can do better than the Boilermakers?
Yeah, I think when you look at, obviously Trey Kaufman-Wren is having a great season, but between the injury to Daniel Jacobson, one of their freshmen who I think had a chance to start early in the season, he's out. Will Berg hasn't totally panned out for them. Caleb First is a veteran, but he's not necessarily a a huge scoring threat. He knows what he's doing out there. But I think if you look at if Umar Ballo and Malik Renew are both able to play well, I think Indiana has a slight advantage there in terms of depth. If you can get Coffin Wren into some foul trouble, like I think he's given up 3 inches or so, 2 or 3 inches, and some pounds to Ballo. So I think it'll be interesting to see if he can guard Ballo for a full game without fouling. And then can if it's first, or if Purdue goes smaller, can they handle Renew? I think that's an edge or that Indiana may, if they can kind of slow it down. And I think they might have to win a lower scoring game because you don't want Purdue to get hot and hit a bunch of threes. But I do see sort of a path to Ballo maybe having a pretty big game, or Renew, just because while Coffin Wren is having a great season, I don't think they have a ton of depth there inside.
Well, Todd, the floor is going to be yours here. You are putting some stuff together about Indiana's history at Mackey Arena. It is an incredibly tough place to play for all comers. And you throw in the rivalry aspect of it between Indiana and Purdue. It's some classics, and probably some blowouts there too, I'm sure, if you look back at it. So what do you have to tell everybody about that series history, specifically at Mackey?
It's been fun to look back. I went back. The series Mackey Arena opened in 1967, so the first IU Purdue game would have been in 1968. And as everybody probably knows, it's very difficult to win up there. I just wrote the story about the Bob Knight versus Gene Cady era, which ended in 2000, and Bob Knight won 6 games against Gene Cady up in West Lafayette, and they played, I believe, 20 times up there. So those were some good IU teams, some good Purdue teams too, of course. But that tells you, though, some really good IU teams did not win up there.
Mm-hmm.
The 1981 national champions did not win up there. The 1987 national champions did not win up there. So it's always been a difficult place to play. Purdue puts good teams on the floor, so that's no big surprise. But but it's fun to see some of the moments that occurred there over the years. Even the 1975 and 1976 teams, which were undefeated in both years. Obviously, the 76 team finished undefeated, but 75 team was undefeated as well going into the tournament. And that was a pivotal game in 1975. IU won, but that was the game where Scott May broke his arm. And that would go on to have ramifications in the NCAA tournament when IU lost to Kentucky. But so it's been interesting. In recent years, it's been tough. IU won up there 2 years ago. And apart from that, it's been thin on the ground in terms of wins up at Mackey in recent years. So, apart from just the rivalry factor, I mean, Purdue has done a good job in the Painter era and the late part of the Cady era in terms of, I think what makes Purdue a little bit unique is just the sheer amount of students that are in that building.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Jack, you've been to most of the Big Ten arenas. In terms of the percentage of the crowd being students, I would think Purdue would be the highest out of all of them, out of the ones I've been to.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I also think they do a great job. Indiana's student section is great because it's just a massive section, sort of. But I do think it creates a really unique atmosphere at Purdue where you have student sections behind both baskets, because then you can get it. Obviously, when guys are shooting for, you're scoring going at a student section in both halves, basically, if that makes sense. And sort of the sound sort of converges, I think, from one end to the other. So, yeah, I don't know. I think Illinois is unique because the students are so close to the court. Michigan State has a pretty big student section, but yeah, I think you're pretty accurate about that topic.
I think in terms of just the percentage, sheer amount of students, because Illinois, Orange Crush is tough because they're right behind the bench. It's not as high a percentage of the crowd. I mean, they're in a very advantageous spot right there on the floor, and they're wild and crazy. But Purdue, it's just a massive, as you said, you feel like you can't get away from that student section. Yeah. And while I've criticized them for being scripted and all that, they are loud, and it does make it hard for other teams to play there. But it's that's part of it. Mackey itself holds in the Sound. I mean, it's an in the round facility. In that respect, it's sort of like Illinois, but it's more, even after the remodeling there, it's a little bit more intimate than Illinois.
Got the
Even
low ceiling.
Michigan has a similar design, but Michigan seems more vast than Mackey is. It's all right there in front of you. And that makes it very difficult to play. And then you add in the fact that Purdue fans hate IU. They want to come in there and beat the hell out of the Hoosiers. So they're always fired up for this game. And so, same thing when Purdue comes down to Bloomington. So it's a very, every year, no matter what the fortunes of the teams happen to be, it's going to be very difficult for Indiana to go in there to Purdue and face that atmosphere, and then you have the team to deal with in the black and gold. So, it's been tough over the years. Probably the only years that where IU really had an edge was in the 2000s, which was when at the end of the Gene Katie era, and when Mike Davis was coaching, when IU had better teams. So, but apart from that, it's been rough sledding up at Mackey for even some of the good Indiana teams over the years.
Well, as of today, Indiana still hanging around the bubble. There's, if you ask people, it's like, they still could make a move, and they've got plenty of opportunities coming up with some really good teams on the schedule. We'll get to that as we get ready to close out. But Jack, you put this together. Second team out according to Joe Lunardi's recent bracketology. I know the fans are frustrated. We've talked about the 25-point losses a couple weeks ago. Now they lose one that they needed, frankly, and they probably could have won and should have won, minus the way it kind of played out at the end. So is it as bad as the fans are making it seem? I'm sure they think the sky is falling and like, what the heck's going on? Like, why can't we get a win? Why can't there be more consistency on the court? Or like, where is this team in terms of the bracketology and how it really looks on the floor and what the fans are feeling? Like, kind of all that in one big formula.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think it's important to recognize that the brackets that come out right now are sort of like if the season were to end today. Sure. So while Indiana is not really out, is not out of it now, and like you mentioned, they have a ton of opportunities that if they were able to rattle off some wins, they're still right in there. The season is not over in that respect. I think where some fans might look at that and scoff is because they haven't been given a whole lot of reason to feel optimistic based on the last couple weeks. So they're like, well, yeah, it's not over yet, but it's about to be over in a week or two. I think is sort of the sentiment I feel like I see from some fans online. So the way that Indiana is going to look at it, and I think we've talked about this with Woodson before, is, stack up a couple of these wins, take it one at a time, and if you can pick up a few big ones, there are opportunities out there. That's kind of a double-edged sword because, you have all these. Indiana still doesn't have a marquee win. They don't have a win over a team that's, I would say, guaranteed to make the tournament. So they need to pick up a few ones. So I think sort of the negativity around it is there isn't much confidence that they can do that, although it's not necessarily over at this point.
Probably the flip side of that, not to be Pollyanna-ish about it, but if IU is the second team out right now, even based on their current resume, the bubble is soft. I mean, it just is. So if Indiana was able to get 2 quad one wins, which, they could get, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, they're right in this. And I agree with all of Jack's points. I mean, this is very much like, it feels like the head is in the guillotine and the blade hasn't come down yet. And the blade is coming, for IU's tournament hopes. But, if, like I said, the bubble is soft. So even 2 quad one wins, depending what happens with some of the other bubble teams, is enough to maybe flip it to the other side. But, but the thing is, though, is that to put that into context, though, that's not what this season was supposed to be about. The bubble was never supposed to be part of the conversation. So, yes, you can look at it optimistically, and of course the team should still be obviously playing for every morsel of hope that they can get. But, in the larger view, this is disappointing that Indiana's in this position in the first place.
I like how Jack put that. The fans, cool. Like they're not out of it yet, but after this week, they probably will be. I mean, like that's where I want. That's what I want to ask before we take a look at these next 6 games. Is that like a Debbie Downer approach, Jack, or is that just that's just realistic? Like that's just the way it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, Purdue, you could argue them or Michigan State are probably the class of the Big Ten this year, and you're playing at Purdue, which is a really difficult place to play. Then the next one is at Wisconsin, where you haven't won since like 1998 or something like that. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's like Indiana's already lost 4 out of their last 5, and they have arguably 2 of their toughest games upcoming. You could probably say at Michigan State might be more difficult than one of these, but at least 2 of their 3 hardest games. So, yeah, I mean, kind of like I said before, like Indiana has played well for stretches, but they just haven't sustained anything for you to get much confidence that they can rattle off, a handful of wins down the stretch.
Let's play a game real fast. Give me one word, Todd. Just a one-word answer, then we'll jump into this a little more deep to finish out. Their next 6 games, Jack just laid out several of them. At number 10, Purdue. At number 17, Wisconsin. Home against Michigan. At number 7, Michigan State. Home against UCLA. And then Purdue again comes to Bloomington. What's one word if you were going to describe this 6-game stretch?
Tough.
Jack, what do you got? I mean, there's a lot of them that would probably work and be similar to that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a gauntlet. That phrase kind of gets used a lot, but that's what it is. Like, there's no nights off. There's no nights off really ever in the Big Ten, but especially this upcoming stretch.
It looks like, I mean, those might all be tournament teams. I mean, Michigan's 15-5. UCLA, I think, is 16-5 or 15-6. Excuse me. The other teams are ranked in the top 20. I mean, so they're all going to make it in. It's just it is a rough stretch. We talked about it last week. Maryland was one of the ones I think that both of you guys put in like the hopeful W column, and that didn't happen. So now, Todd, you got 6 games coming up here before a couple more to end the season. After you watch the loss to Maryland, what's a realistic record over the next 6?
Well, realistically, you got to beat Michigan at home. Realistically, you have to beat UCLA at home.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically now, you probably have to beat Purdue at home. So I don't see any of the road wins any of the road games, I should say, being road wins.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see it. I wouldn't see any team going into those 3 places. And
yeah,
I wouldn't even the better teams in the Big Ten, I wouldn't favor them in those games. So that's what you're looking at. And it's not just the games. I mean, it's the atmosphere around the program.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't good right now at all. And so you're dealing with the accumulation of that. You got probably I want to characterize this carefully. The most passionate, I guess, is the word I would use to describe it, fans. Some of them want these losses so they can get a coach change.
Mm.
So you get some of that going, or that's been going. And then the players are kind of caught in the middle of that. The players seem to me kind of circle the wagons as you would in that situation. I mean, I don't know what people would expect them to do. So you got to protect those home games. And they didn't protect a home game on Sunday. So there's, healthy skepticism of whether Indiana can pull that off. I think it's going to be difficult, but I think for them to salvage this season, they don't have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, is 3-3 the ceiling here, Jack? I mean, is that like there's no way they can get more than 3 wins through this 6-game stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that's the ceiling. Like the games at Purdue, Wisconsin, and Michigan State.
So tough.
I have a hard time seeing that they could win any of those. In the past, it's sort of been in past seasons, at Indiana, it's sort of been like a feeling when you're at Assembly Hall that you can beat almost anyone. I feel like that feeling has sort of gone away this year. So that kind of makes you less confident in some of those home games. But UCLA has had a tough time, as we heard in that like Mick Cronin rant a few weeks ago. They've had a tough time when they have to travel far.
I thought that was AI. Like you see those
Yeah.
coach press conferences. I'm like, he didn't really say all that, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
wild.
I mean, he's not wrong in some ways.
Yeah.
It is tough. So, that one should be a win. We were talking before. I think the Michigan game is a really interesting matchup with kind of the bigs from both teams. So I think they can win two games. I could also, it's sort of the case where all of these are losable and a couple of them are winnable. So yeah, I would say three is probably the ceiling. Two keeps you alive, I guess, because then you can make a run. There at the end of the season, the schedule gets a little bit easier, although you have to then do the West Coast trip. But if Indiana can, get out of this with 2 wins, I guess they're probably still alive, and then just got to finish really strong.
I was looking at the schedule too. You guys had alluded to this before. They've got that really long layoff between UCLA and Purdue, which I mean, that can always throw a wrench into things in a couple different directions. UCLA traveling, across the country for an 8:00 game. That's 5:00 for that's tough and kind of weird. So man, what a stretch though! What a stretch of 6 games before they then finish out with Penn State, Washington. They got to go to Washington, to Oregon. I mean, it doesn't really let up. It doesn't really let up, and they've got to get some of these wins here, or they're going to be on the outside looking in for the rest of the way. But as of right now, Lenardi's got them right on the edge. Soft bubble or not, they're probably on the outside looking in right now with lots of opportunities to improve that resume. Fellas, I don't know. It's I wish we could talk about an amazing performance one of these times, but we haven't had that in the last handful of shows that we've done, and it's going to be tough to maybe get that at Purdue. But let's just finish right there at Purdue. Do we have a score prediction? I mean, we haven't done a score prediction yet. I know you guys both don't think it's probably going to be a loss. But Jack, how do you actually see it playing out? How close do you think you can get?
Yeah, I think the way that Indiana's defense is playing makes it really tough to see a win in this one. I'd say maybe something around like 84-70, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, just sort of without giving much thought to it. Probably about what I'd say.
More high scoring, potentially good shooting for Purdue. It sounds like you get to 84 points. Todd, what about you? Does that sound about right, or do you think it'd be a little lower than that?
No, I had a 15-point margin in my head.
Yeah.
I'm not going to – how they get there, it's probably pretty close to what Jack had in mind. I mean, it's just going to be – one thing we didn't talk about is the depth that Purdue's guards has in their backcourt. It's not just Lawyer and Smith, CJ Cox, Cam Heide, who's kind of a tweener guard, can do some things in the paint, Miles Colvin. Indiana just doesn't have the depth of people to defend people like that. Jakari Harris, I should have brought him up. One of those guys usually is productive for Purdue, and I think that's going to be difficult, assuming Purdue's normal, leading scorers are productive. You mentioned the matchups earlier. I do think, and Jack mentioned a lot of it, Indiana can put pressure on their post players, but Purdue could put a lot of pressure on Indiana's perimeter players. So I think that's going to be too difficult to overcome. I think Purdue by 15 is about what I have in my head.
Yeah, I sort of also wonder, Purdue doesn't have a great matchup for Mackenzie Mbako, so if he can get hot offensively, but he's sort of been really hot and cold in terms of he'll either have a big game or a quiet game. But not many teams have a great matchup for kind of a 6'9" wing. So if it could be another if he's finding his stroke, I guess that could be another advantage for Indiana. But we've talked a lot about inconsistency, and he's sort of the model of that.
Yeah.
IU has unlocked him though. I think Renew's return creates opportunities for McKenzie to go to the rim where he can be. He needs to go. I wrote about it a couple weeks ago. He needs to go to the rim, and in the last 2 games he has, and it's no accident that he's suddenly productive again. Whether Purdue, but teams are going to start to see what IU is doing on film, and Purdue's good at sussing those things out. So, and McKenzie has to be assertive in terms of not just shooting from the outside, but going to the rim. And to me, I think that's the key with him, and that needs to continue for Indiana to be successful. But you're right; they don't. I think of Cam Heide is probably the only one who truly matches Mbako. And Cam Heide's a good player, but there's things IU can do, but a lot of it has to come together all at once, and that's always the struggle for any team going to Mackey.
No doubt. There you have it. They are Todd and Jack. I am Brandon. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Indiana Hoosiers Roundtable. We'll check back in next week after, probably in between these next 2 games, I would guess, right, fellas? We'll be back on before the game at Wisconsin.
I don't know about that. That's going to be tough to do.
Okay, well, we'll see when we can jump back in here. Friday night at Purdue, 8 p.m., and then at Wisconsin on February 4th on a Tuesday. Yeah, we'll see if we can. Yeah, that's a little quick, I guess. I was thinking it was a little later in the week looking at the schedule, but
Yeah.
so we'll
Michigan.
be back in between after these next 2 road games before that Michigan game where, that's where I reside. That's where my wheelhouse was for 10 years. I may be able to speak to the Wolverines a little bit as I host these guys and they fill you all in on Indiana. So thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back within the next week to talk more Indiana Hoosiers basketball.